In the serene suburb of Willow Creek, everything always appeared unnaturally pristine, as if each blade of grass had been clipped with military precision, and every neighbor's smile was practiced for show. But for Thomas Miller, a single father caring for his disabled daughter, that calm was a delicate illusion he clung to desperately. His daughter, Anna, just 10 years old and bound to a wheelchair after a tragic accident, radiated a brightness that often outshone even the most confident adults. Yet, much to Thomas's dismay, her light made her a target in a community that prized conformity over compassion. It was on a particularly golden evening that the first true fracture in their fragile peace began to appear. As Thomas wheeled Anna along the freshly paved sidewalks, bordered with flower beds seemingly lifted from a magazine, he spotted their neighbor, Marjorie Kent, standing rigidly by her spotless white picket fence. Her eyes squinted, lips drawn tight until the veins in her neck strained, as though she were suppressing every ounce of venom inside her. With a chilling smile that never reached her eyes, she said, "Some of us work hard to keep this neighborhood quiet. Thomas, maybe you should think about keeping your little girl indoors, where she won't upset the balance." Her words, dripping with cruelty, froze Thomas for a moment. He forced a polite smile and wheeled Anna past as if he hadn't heard, though his grip on the wheelchair handles tightened, knuckles turning white. Anna tilted her head and whispered softly, "Daddy, did I do something wrong?" A question that shattered him from within. How could a child so innocent ever deserve such malice? Yet he leaned close, reassuring her gently, "You've done nothing wrong, sweetheart. Nothing at all." All the while, Marjorie's piercing gaze followed them, predatory and unyielding. Thomas tried to dismiss it as the bitterness of a lonely woman, but he could feel the weight of her stare even as they reached their driveway. A gaze that made his skin crawl. That night, as he tucked Anna into bed, her smile forced and her voice softer than usual, he silently vowed to shield her from whatever darkness lurked behind Marjorie's pristine facade. Yet he didn't yet realize that this was only the beginning of a nightmare far more sinister than he could imagine. As he drew the curtains in Anna's room, he glimpsed a faint silhouette at Marjorie's window across the street. Motionless, framed by the warm glow of her living room lamp. Her eyes seemed to memorize every detail of Anna's room. Thomas froze. This wasn't a casual glance from a neighbor. It was the deliberate gaze of someone who had already decided to make them a target. A chill ran down his spine as he closed the curtains tighter, kissed his daughter's forehead, and whispered a prayer, unaware that from this night onward, their lives would be shadowed by Marjorie Kent's obsessive, suffocating presence. In the days that followed, what should have been ordinary routines became impossible. Marjorie's eyes seemed to track them constantly, her disdain gradually spilling into cutting remarks that slashed at Innocence. Anna, now let's call her Emily, for her spirit transcended any name, tried to brush them off with a smile. Yet Thomas noticed the shadows creeping into her once bright eyes, and it tore him apart. Nothing hurt more than seeing your child lose pieces of herself because of someone else's cruelty. Marjorie's obsession intensified daily. She began with petty HOA complaints about trivial matters, like the ramp Thomas had installed for Emily's wheelchair, claiming it ruined the neighborhood's aesthetic. Soon, she whispered poison at HOA meetings, painting Emily as a disruption and suggesting Thomas used her as an excuse to break community rules. Though Thomas cared little for gossip, he worried about how other neighbors treated them. Friendly smiles turned into tight-lipped nods, casual greetings slowed, and eventually some avoided them altogether, fearful of drawing Marjorie's wrath. Thomas's frustration became a dull, persistent ache, especially when Emily confided in him late at night, her small fingers clutching his hand desperately. "Daddy, why don't the neighbors want to play with me anymore?" she whispered, and he felt as though he were failing in the one job he valued above all, protecting her heart. The breaking point arrived on a rainy afternoon when Emily pleaded to wheel down to the park at the end of the street. Hesitant but unwilling to cage her spirit, Thomas held an umbrella over her as they laughed through the drizzle. But then Marjorie appeared, emerging like a shadow that had been lying in wait. Her umbrella snapped open, and she marched toward them, voice raised loud enough for all to hear. "This is exactly the problem. Always flaunting your daughter like some charity case. Don't you think we're tired of this constant pity party?" Her words struck Thomas like acid. Before he could respond, her heel pressed into a puddle, sending mud splattering across Emily's wheelchair, staining both the wheels and her skirt. And for the first time, Thomas saw the cruel smirk curl across Marjorie's lips, a deliberate act, not an accident. Rage surged inside him. Yet he forced himself to remain calm, knowing that losing his temper would only fuel her further. He tightened his grip on the wheelchair and guided Emily home. The silence between them was heavier than any storm. Once inside, Emily's composure crumbled. Tears slid down her cheeks as she whispered, "Why does she hate me so much, Daddy? I never did anything to her." Thomas held her tightly, whispering promises of protection and reassurance that one day, they would be safe. By the end of that week, Thomas had grown accustomed to the constant unease pressing on his chest. Every smile he forced for Emily was chipped at the edges, and he could sense a looming darkness, like a storm refusing to break. And he was right. That night everything shifted. Emily, now called Sophie in this chapter, begged to Will outside for just a few minutes, wanting to feel the evening breeze brush her face. After a long day of restless energy swirling through their cramped home, Thomas finally gave in, convincing himself he would just stand close and keep watch. What he didn't anticipate was Marjorie's lurking presence, her obsession boiling into something dangerous, something uncontrollable. As Sophie's laughter floated softly across the yard while she rolled her wheelchair along the smooth pavement, Thomas slipped inside for just a moment to fetch her blanket. That's when he heard it. The harsh scrape of movement. The stifled cry that split the night. His heart seized, and he dropped the blanket, sprinting outside to witness a scene that would haunt him forever. Marjorie crouched low behind Sophie's wheelchair, her face twisted grotesquely under the street lamp, hands gripping with intent. The thick rope was looped tightly around Sophie's fragile neck, pulling with cruel precision, while Sophie's tiny hands clawed at it desperately, eyes wide with terror, gasping for air. For an instant, Thomas froze, unable to process the horror before him. Then a guttural, primal roar tore from his throat. He lunged forward, shoving Marjorie with all his strength, fumbling to tear the rope from his daughter's throat. Marjorie's nails dug into his arms, her face contorting into something almost inhuman as she shrieked, "She doesn't belong here. She's ruining everything. I'll make it stop." Those words cut deeper than the nails tearing his skin. This wasn't a fleeting outburst from a neighbor. It was a long festering hatred erupting into violence. Finally, Thomas freed the rope. Sophie collapsed into his arms, coughing, her chest heaving in desperate gasps, while Marjorie stumbled back, eyes wild and glassy, seemingly shocked at her own actions. But remorse never came. Instead, a cold, calculating smile spread across her lips. Before Thomas could restrain her or call for help, voices and footsteps echoed from the distance. Neighbors spilling onto their porches, phones in hand. In a twisted turn, Marjorie began screaming, painting herself as the victim, claiming Thomas had attacked her while she had only tried to help during his daughter's choking. The rope still dangled in her hands. Sophie's neck bore raw marks, yet several neighbors hesitated, unable, or unwilling, to challenge the queen of their HOA. When the police sirens cut through the night, Thomas's relief shifted into dread. Deep down, he knew Marjorie's influence ran deep, able to twist the truth into lies. Unsurprisingly, when the officers arrived, she performed flawlessly, crocodile tears streaking her cheeks as she spun a tale of Thomas's discipline and her own heroism. Thomas shouted, pleading for them to see Sophie's bruised neck, the rope burns etched into her skin. But the officers' eyes drifted uneasily toward Marjorie, their questions aimed more at him than her. As Sophie clung to his shirt, trembling, Thomas realized in chilling clarity that justice might not be theirs here. Not with Marjorie entrenched in the community. Though the police eventually left without arresting her, their warning to Thomas about keeping things under control echoed like a death sentence. The system would not protect them. Marjorie was free to stalk, torment, and strike again. That night, as Thomas held Sophie close, gritting his teeth in vowful determination, one thought gnawed at him. If she had tried once, she would do it again. Next time, she might not fail. In the days following the rope attack, Thomas, now Daniel, as despair hardened into resolve, oscillated between rage and disbelief. How could a grown woman nearly strangle a disabled child in plain sight, with witnesses, and walk away emboldened, head held high? as if victorious. Worse than the rope burns on Lily's fragile neck were the invisible scars. The way she flinched at footsteps, gripped his hands at night, whispering trembling, "Daddy, she's still out there." Daniel wanted to comfort her, to assure her monsters couldn't cross locked doors, but he knew the truth. In this neighborhood, doors meant nothing. Marjorie, now revealed as Karen, controlled the system, her influence spreading like poison through the HOA. Daniel's fear crystallized when a letter arrived in their mailbox, stamped with the HOA seal, citing him for creating disturbances and violating community standards. The very act of defending his daughter had been criminalized. He crumpled the paper in his fists, shaken not by the fine but by the threat. Repeated violations could mean removal, eviction. Karen hadn't just tried to steal his daughter's breath. She had set a precedent, leaving Daniel hypervigilant. Every creak, every whisper of wind, made his heart pound, because he knew Karen wasn't finished. The rope had been only the beginning. He never let Lily, now Grace, for the strength she embodied, out of sight. Yet one gray, thunder-heavy afternoon, the nightmare struck again. Grace had asked to roll to the porch while Daniel fixed a leaky kitchen faucet. He checked every lock, scanned every corner, and still heard it. The guttural cry ripping from her throat, the thud of wheels against wood. He rushed outside, wrench in hand, and nearly fell to his knees. Karen hunched low, feral, the rope wrapped around Grace's throat again, yanking with vicious force. Grace's lips were turning blue, her small hands clawing weakly, eyes bulging in terror. For a moment, Daniel saw only red. He charged forward, wrench slipping from his grip, tackled Karen to the ground, freed the rope with one hand, and pinned her wrists with the other. His voice a raw, ragged roar as he screamed, "You will never touch her again." But Karen only laughed, a sound so chilling and unhinged it froze him, even amidst his own fury. Through her clenched teeth she hissed, "She doesn't belong here. She's a stain and I'll erase her." Words that seared into Daniel's soul like molten iron. Every instinct in him screamed to strike, to end this madness with his own hands. But Grace's rasping cough behind him pulled him back from the edge. Her fragile gasps reminded him that losing control, becoming the monster Karen wanted him to be, would mean she had won. Twisting the truth, convincing the world of her lies. With trembling restraint, he let go, lifting Grace into his arms as tears ran down her cheeks, whispering frantic apologies into her hair. Karen, unbothered, rose slowly, dusting off her skirt with a triumphant smirk, murmuring, "No one will believe you. They never do." Then she disappeared down the street, as if attempting to murder a child in broad daylight were nothing at all. Daniel wanted to chase her, to end this nightmare, but Grace's shallow breaths kept him rooted, each second comforting her a painful reminder of how close he had come to losing her. When he finally called the police, pleading for help, their response was so dismissive it nearly shattered him. An officer sighed on the other end. "Sir, we've already warned you about making false reports. Maybe you should consider relocating if you feel unsafe." The words cracked something deep inside him. Not only had the system failed, it had actively protected her, choosing convenience over justice. That night, as Grace slept fitfully with ice packs around her neck, Daniel sat in the dark living room, staring at a rope coiled across the coffee table like a serpent daring him to act. Promises and prayers felt hollow. If he waited for justice, his daughter might not survive. Then his phone buzzed, a number he didn't recognize. A deep voice said only 7 words, "He's coming home. She won't be alone." Before he could ask, the line went dead. Daniel's pulse raced. Only one man could mean that. Grace's father, a soldier long gone to war, a ghost Daniel never expected to return. Despite the uncertainty gnawing at him, one truth burned clear. The nightmare wasn't over, but Karen had picked the wrong family to destroy. When Michael Harper returned from deployment, he had no idea the home waiting for him had become a battlefield deadlier than any combat zone. The moment he stepped off the transport plane, unease gnawed at him, though he couldn't name why. Maplewood Heights' quiet streets offered no comfort. Fear had poisoned the familiar lawns and trimmed hedges. And when he arrived at Grace's house, he saw the evidence. Faint scrape marks on the front gate, the lingering tension in the air, neighbors peeking from behind curtains with wary, wide eyes. Michael's combat-honed instincts flared as he sprinted up the driveway. There, huddled in the corner of the porch, Grace clung to Daniel as though he were the last lifeline on earth. Her eyes wide, haunted by terror he could feel through her trembling hands. Recognition flickered when she finally looked up, a small spark of hope breaking through the darkness. Michael pulled her into a tight embrace, promising with soldier's certainty that no one would harm her again. Tears streaming down his face, Daniel recounted the horrors of the past weeks. The rope, the bruises, the indifferent police. Michael listened, jaw tight, fists clenching as he imagined Karen. The night Evelyn chose to strike again was thick with storm clouds, the wind rattling windows and tossing leaves like restless spirits. Michael, every sense alert from months of training and weeks of witnessing his daughter's torment, positioned himself silently in the shadows. Grace, trembling but resolute, sat in her wheelchair, hands gripping the armrests like anchors to life itself. Daniel stood behind, his heart heavy with fear and determination, knowing the predator had underestimated a family bound by love and pain. As Evelyn slithered toward the porch, rope coiled in her hands, eyes glinting with murderous intent, Michael's pulse slowed to predator rhythm. Calculating, anticipating, ready. When Evelyn lunged, thinking Grace would be alone, Michael struck from the shadows with precise, impossible speed, disarming her and twisting the rope from her grasp. Daniel grabbed her arms to restrain her. Evelyn's smug expression crumbled, replaced by panic, disbelief, and raw fear. In that frozen moment, Grace, small but fearless, whispered, "You're not touching me anymore." Her voice trembled, but the words landed harder than any blow. The terror Evelyn had built, the manipulation, threats, stalking, had collapsed. They were no longer victims but a united force. Neighbors spilled onto the street, witnesses to weeks of cruelty exposed. Michael, keeping Evelyn pinned, spoke with authority, rage, and unwavering love. "This ends now. No more lies, no more threats, no more fear." His words shattered the illusion of ignorance, and whispers of her attacks spread like wildfire. Daniel knelt beside Grace, brushing damp hair from her face, murmuring apologies and praise, telling her how proud he was of her courage, how she had survived. Despite exhaustion and lingering fear, Grace offered a small, victorious smile, a glimmer of light piercing the darkness. When authorities arrived, faced with multiple witnesses and undeniable evidence, the rope in Evelyn's hands, marks on Grace's neck, neighbor testimonies, they had no choice but to detain her. Pleas for sympathy fell flat against the reality of her crimes. As she was led away, eyes wild and furious, Michael held Grace tightly, Daniel supporting her other side. For the first time in weeks, the house felt like home again. Shadows no longer oppressive, the storm outside mirrored by the calm washing over them. As the family embraced, Michael whispered promises of protection, safety, and a life free from fear.